he was so insistent on coming, he actually flew here from tour to be with us tonight. So thank you again for joining us. And this is a really special presentation, and we're very, very excited to have him and fantastic charters here with him this evening. So without further ado, I will leave the stage to him.
There's never a proper response when you're sitting at the doctor's office as he proceeds to tell you those are cancer cells they found in your body. My doctor doesn't wait for one, but rather he takes my distant stare into the sterile white walls as his cue to tell me to stay positive. After all, research showed that if treated early, testicular cancer has a 95% survival rate, and just then I was tempted to say, 95% means nothing if destiny doesn't intend me to be a part of that statistic. When I bite my tongue, kept my eyes fixated across the room, waiting until he was done, explaining the process of what's meant to happen next. He says step 1 involves cutting a 4-inch incision beneath my belly, then with a probe, guide the entire right testicle up through the pelvic region, extract it through the incision. Now imagine there I am, pumped with anesthesia, counting down slowly from 10, each second maliciously haunted by the disturbing thought that when I wake, I will never be whole again. Now it's off to step 2. Nauseated and confused, I quickly learned that Percocets and poetry writing just don't mix. When I pop them on the hour, every hour, because as every hour ticks, the pain returns, radiates through nerves like tattoos being etched from the inside. So I gotta pop pills until I feel the pain begin to subside. My doctor says all I can do is wait until the incision heals, wait for the pathology report, wait to see if the cancer was caught in time, wait to get back to my right state of mind, wait for sanity, wait for a miracle, wait for a blessing. It's so unsettling that when it comes to cancer, there seems to be a lot of waiting for the unknown. And I'm trying to stay positive, but being at home bedridden with boredom makes the mind wander. Imagination running rampant like a purse snatcher, taking off with your high hopes, then carries it to the darkest alleys of your fears. And despite how hard you try to steer clear, there you are, shuffling in the dark, fingers fumbling for something to hold on to, facing the sky looking for some sort of rescue, pronouncing prayers that always seem to end with, what is it that you want me to do? Because when you're there, catching quick stares from the eyes of death, playing Russian roulette with alpha-fetal protein levels and tumor markers, you can't help but wonder if God is even paying any sort of attention to the tribulations I'm facing. It's amazing how it's been 4 days since the surgery, and I still haven't had the courage to look at myself naked in the bathroom mirror. 4 days and still waiting on test results. 4 days and refusing to see visitors. 4 days. And my wife wakes me from sleep with a kiss on the cheek that suddenly tells me that God is still listening. And he speaks to me through her, tells me that nothing occurs without his touch. And though this episode right now might seem too much, just know that it's happening for a reason. To change me the same way he changes the season, because God doesn't give you dreams to taunt you, and God doesn't give you anything you can't handle, and God rebuilds, he doesn't dismantle. So here I am, broken but still beautiful, thankful to be blessed by the presence of family and friends, a loving girl, a beautiful audience, and a 4-inch scar that I now pass off as a stab wound I got from a knife fight because I'm hardcore like that. But I'm alive, and I've survived, so give me the choice to ride or die, and I'll spread my arms to the side to touch both ends of the earth. Damn right, me and my one testicle's taking over the world. Because when the wind blows next, only waiting can tell. But ask me what I learned from cancer, and I'll answer that sometimes you have to lose a part of you to find your whole self. How's it going, Ted? How you guys doing, everybody? So, by round of applause, how many of you can positively say that this is the first time you heard a TED Talk where the guy actually starts a talk off by talking about his testicles? Makes me There goes a line on my bucket list, and I'm putting that on my resume. This is my brother-in-law, Jolin. Both of us were storytellers. I tell stories with poetry, and he tells the same exact story with music, and we have been merging the two together for over 5 years now, right? But the story isn't what's important. What's important is the right story at the right time. And believe me, up until 1 minute before we got on this stage, I was still debating whether or not I would start everything with that poem. But as soon as the word testicle came out of my mouth, I knew that's it, I'm committed, I have to stick with it. I'm either gonna succeed or I'm gonna fall flat on my face, right? But as is life, right? 1 minute you're cruising and everything is perfect and everything is beautiful, and the next minute it seems like you're on this runaway train and you can't stop it, right? You have no control, and the only control that you actually have is how you're gonna respond afterwards, how you're gonna brace yourself for the impact. In my life, I've had to brace the impact twice, right? And we're not talking about fender benders here. We're not talking about the daily things that we get caught up in bills and career. I'm talking about head-on collisions that have the ability to just destroy everything around you. The first time was cancer, right? I remember being at the doctor's office, the day that they told me about cancer, and everything just happened so fast, right? Because 1 minute, one day I'm having pains in my groin, and within that same week, I'm already getting prepped for surgery. And you have really, at that point I had no control. There's nothing I can do. This train was already taken off and I'm just gonna have to ride it for what it is. But I knew I needed to control something. So I decided I'm gonna control it by doing poetry, by writing about it. Whether or not it ends beautifully or whether it ends in disaster, I'm just gonna document every single moment of it because that was the only way that I knew I was gonna be able to cope with whatever might happen afterwards. But what I didn't know was by the time I finished writing that poem was what's going to give me a voice. It's what finally gave me purpose. It's finally what gave me, something meaningful to talk about. And now, here I am, 500 college shows later, 7 years cancer-free, doing a TED Talk for you beautiful people, right? You know what I'm saying? And it's been such an amazing ride. Now you would think that would be the perfect ending, right? The perfect ending. If my life was a movie, that would be right there. That's where it ends, and there's an inspirational speech at the end, and everything is, But life isn't a movie, The credits don't roll, and people still have to continue moving forward. And that was never so clear to me until last summer, when I didn't know it yet at that time, but I was gonna have to brace myself for the impact for the second time. Last July, I went to California to visit my mother and my siblings, which I always do every summer when the tour subsides and my boredom has completely annoyed my wife to the death. And she's like, I liked it better when you were on the road, why don't you go on vacation, right? So last summer, thinking that was a great idea, I flew over to California to hang out with my family. And this is what I did for 3 weeks while I was in California. I would wait until my sister gets off work, and then she would come home and we would sit on the couch, laptops open, watching television, and not say a single word to each other for 4 hours, right? Have you ever loved somebody so much that sometimes you don't even need to talk? You don't even need to entertain. You just love being with each other so much that just being in each other's presence was enough. Now don't get me wrong, when me and my brothers and sisters are all goofing around, we are the biggest jokers, but in this instance, we just love being there, just with each other. Well, on the last day that I was supposed to fly back to Florida, my sister came home very early from work, and I looked at her and said, well, what are you doing home? You don't get off for another 3 hours. And she said, well, I had to come home because I've had this headache that has bothered me for over 3 days now, and it hasn't gone away. And now mind you, my sister is the healthiest person I know. She will not call out of work for anything. There's nothing wrong with her body. Well, maybe except for her liver, because apparently her and Hennessy have a very important relationship. So for her to come home, and my mom being the overprotective mom that she is, we're like, we need to take you to the ER, we need to make sure you're checked out. And my sister's like, it's just a headache, it'll be fine. So I looked at my sister, I said, you know what, you better go, because mom's not gonna let up, you might as well just go and make her happy. So they go to the ER, I finish packing, and 2 hours later I get a text message from my sister. And she says, so it looks like they found a tumor in my brain. And there goes that runaway train all over again. So I jump out of my seat, I go to the ER to make sure she was okay. When I get there, she's laying in bed, and she was like, oh, good news. It looks like the tumor isn't cancerous. Looks like I've had it since I was 14. The doctor says that although it is, it's a little risky because it's brain surgery, it's on the surface in between the two halves, so all he has to do really is just open it up and take it out, and it's not that invasive. The only downfall is I'll have a metal plate in my head, but the good news is I'll be able to get better cell phone signal. You should know that my family and I, we are the biggest jokers, especially when it comes time when it's stressful situations. The best way we cope with it is through comedy, right? So of course, me and my brother are messing around with her at this point, knowing she's going to be all right. Well, it's good. When you get done with surgery, we're going to stand you right next to the TV. We'll get every sports channel you can possibly get. And my brother was like, looking at her IV, was like, would you like us to fill this with Hennessy for you? And things like that. And so knowing that she was going to be okay, I'm going to fly back to Florida. Is there anything that you need from me though? And my sister looked at me and she said, well, just make sure that when they do surgery, that they don't cross any wires. Because I don't want to be blinking my eyes and my arm will lift up, like automatically. So just make sure everything is still intact when I'm done. I'm like, all right. So I flew back to Florida on Friday. That Monday she went into surgery. That Tuesday I called up her fiance, asked to see if she was okay. And he said, oh yeah, she's doing great. She actually woke up. She recognized all of us, called all of us by name. She even called your brother ugly, so we know her brain's still intact. Right? The only downfall is she couldn't move some of her extremities, and we feel that it's probably because of the anesthesia, but the doctor says that once the anesthesia goes away, she should be back to normal. So that, great news. My father, happy. However, on Thursday, 2 days later, I get a frantic phone call from my mother. My mother calls me and says, you need to get back here. And I said, why? She goes, somewhere in the middle of the night, they rushed your sister back to the ICU because a blood vessel hemorrhaged in her brain and she fell into a coma. And that's when the train was seriously going. So I flew back to California that Friday. By that Monday, the doctors had already pronounced her brain dead. And they were telling us that we needed to figure out when we're going to pull the plug. Not if, but when. So we decided to sleep at the hospital that night. We slept in the waiting room, and I couldn't control what was happening. I felt so helpless. Seeing my sister with tubes and everything, I just felt so helpless. So I went back to when it happened to me. What could I control? The only thing I could control was writing about it. I was the only writer in my family, and I knew that none of them were going to document this. This was the only thing that I could do. So I started to document everything that was happening as it happened, whether or not it was going to end great or whether or not it's going to end terribly. Because there we were, still sitting in the waiting room, hoping that she'll still wake up, that the doctors are wrong. The only problem was I just didn't know how to start it. But as I was watching TV that night, my mind was wandering. This show came on, Animal Planet. Planet, and it was a documentary, and they had a segment on there, and it was funny because they talked about the woolly caterpillar, and apparently when the snow falls in the winter, the woolly caterpillar crawls into a crevice and freezes to death. Its blood stops flowing, its lungs harden into ice, its heart comes slowly to a halt. The heart is always the last to go, but when the snow melts in the spring, the ice thaws from its ventricles, the crystals dissolves from its lungs, and just as slowly as it died, the woolly caterpillar awakens and comes back to life. For 120 hours, we waited for my sister to wake up. My family mumbling prayers around the doctor who tells us she fell into a coma when a blood vessel hemorrhaged, and my father hasn't stopped praying since. My stepfather searching the eyes of doctors for the answers to those prayers. My siblings pushing me into the room as though I could perform a miracle. My mother making twin towers of my arms the way she crashes into them now, while I attempted to believe that my faith far exceeds science and God would awaken her somehow. Awaken, sweet sister. Tell me that my tears the size of mustard seeds will fall upon your cheek and move the mountain of swelling in your brain. Tell me that the same God who makes all things possible can still live up to his name, because right now that name belongs to your mother, who's cursing God for being too coward to make up his own mind as she stares at the medical forms granting the hospital permission to let you die. If he wants her, then take her, she says. Who am I to decide? And by her side is your fiancé, whose fists are stones he's ready to throw if the doctor mentions organ donation just one more time. But your father, he sits still praying at your bedside, wrapping rosaries around your hands and tucking prayer cards behind your neck. God will resurrect my daughter, he says. Please, God, tell me she'll resurrect. How do I respond? How do I agree when the tubes of your IV intertwines around my throat, strangles my voice every time I plead? Awaken, sweet sister. Make this poem easier to write. Tonight, pull out the respirator in your throat and speak the words that will end this poem brighter than how it begun. Remove the tubes and we'll blow kisses into your veins that you may know where the true source of your life comes from, how it comes from your heart, how in this hurricane world you broke into tiny pieces, dropped them like care packages on our laps. You always had enough of it to give, which is why there are 200 people in the waiting room now, ready to give it back in case you needed to live. But on the 7th day, the doctor gave us the results of the last test my sister will ever take, and I swear I'm not built for earthquakes like that. My knees buckling like a bridge, my arms shaking too much to catch another one of my mother's crash landings. None of us was left standing. We were all falling through the cracks, falling until we hit the floor of her room that night. This is what rock bottom must look like. The nurse disconnecting her machines, our hands stretching to touch a part of her as we wailed, our tears dropping as fast as her heart beat, our sanity vanishing with her breath. Faster it faded, my stepfather stroking her face. Faster it faded, my father presses her hand to his cheek. Faster it faded, we're still waiting on a miracle. Faster it faded, my face planted to my mother's belly. Mommy, this hurts. Faster it faded, and then it was finished. Monitors dropped to 0, and as her breath emptied and her heartbeat slowed, her fiancé removes the ring from her finger, ties it to his necklace, and says, how fitting. It was her heart that was the last to go. It was silent after that. Silent as my mother reaches over to close her daughter's eyes. My stepfather releases a long-awaited sigh. My sibling straightens the creases in her blanket while my father unravels the rosary from her hands, takes the prayer cards from behind her neck and slips them into his pocket, places a kiss on her forehead, her chest, and both her shoulders. Put in a good word to God for us, he says. And that's when I knew that all along we had failed to see the light at the end of this tunnel she was going through. Because while we were praying for her awakening, the awakening was really meant for us, to remind us that life is a coma we can still choose to wake up from. That faith means not having to wait for the sun to come, because sometimes the sun doesn't come, but we can still rise on our own. Her last breath has already blown life into the candles of our bones, with nothing more but a wish that we may live more fully. The woolly caterpillar freezes to death in the winter and comes back to life in the spring. For 14 years, it goes through the same cycle of awakening, waiting until the final year when its work is complete, then spins itself into a cocoon to be reborn a moth and fly away for good. So sleep now, sweet sister. You surrendered your life for too many winters. We'll take it from here. Sleep now wherever you wake. May you be reborn with wings on your back, fly into the sun, knowing when our own winter ends, spring will come and we'll see each other again. But until then, yeah, put in a good word to God for us. Thank you guys so much.